The 12 ships of the Zephyrian fleet moved through space like silent shadows against the stars. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the main screen. Earth looked peaceful, from this distance, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans and brown land masses. "Sir, we are now entering the outer system," said Navigator Quindal from his station. His long fingers moved across the control panel with practiced ease. "All ships report ready for observation phase." Vextar nodded slowly. This was his 48th planetary conquest, and each one followed the same pattern. First came observation, then invasion planning, and finally the quick takeover. The Zephyrian Empire had perfected this process over hundreds of years. "Begin deep scans of the primary planet," Vextar ordered. "I want to know everything about these creatures before we make our move." Science Officer Krelnox looked up from her instruments. "Initial readings show a population of approximately 8 billion life forms, Commander. They appear to be bipedal, similar to our own body structure but smaller." "Excellent," Vextar said with satisfaction. "And their technology level?" Krelnox frowned at her readings. "This is interesting, sir. We detected radio signals from this planet decades ago that suggested very primitive technology. Basic communication systems, simple transportation methods. But now I'm seeing more advanced readings." "How much more advanced?" Vextar asked, though he wasn't worried. The Zephyrians had conquered species with much higher technology than these humans could possibly possess. "Still well below our capabilities," Krelnox replied. "They have achieved basic spaceflight and some orbital structures, but nothing that would pose a threat to our forces." Vextar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Perfect. Deploy the observation drones. I want detailed behavioral analysis before we begin the invasion." The bridge crew worked efficiently, their purple-skinned hands moving across various controls. Within minutes, dozens of small, invisible drones launched from the fleet and began their journey toward Earth's surface. "Drones are active and transmitting," reported Communications Officer Zalrock. "We should have visual contact within the hour." Vextar settled into his command chair. "Remind me of our intelligence reports on this species." Krelnox pulled up the files on her screen. "The species calls themselves humans. They are carbon-based, require oxygen to breathe and water to survive. Average height appears to be between 5 and 6 feet. They live in large groups in constructed settlements." "Weapons capabilities?" Vextar asked. "Primitive kinetic weapons, some explosive devices, basic energy systems. Nothing that could penetrate our ship shielding," Krelnox answered. "Their military forces appear to be small and poorly organized compared to galactic standards. Social structure? They appear to have multiple competing factions across their planet. No unified government or military command. This should make conquest much easier as we can deal with each region separately." Vextar was pleased. A divided species was always easier to conquer than a united one. "What about their physical capabilities?" Krelnox scrolled through the data. "Standard for a species from a moderate gravity world. They appear to be adapted for their specific environment, but show no exceptional strength, speed, or endurance. Typical prey species characteristics." "Prey species?" asked Navigator Quindal. "Yes," Krelnox explained. "Their eyes are positioned on the front of their heads, which suggests they were once predators, but their current behavior patterns indicate they have become largely passive. They spend most of their time in stationary activities, consume processed foods, and avoid physical conflict." "That makes sense," Vextar said. "Advanced civilizations tend to become soft as they develop technology. They rely on machines instead of their own abilities." The first images from the observation drones began appearing on the main screen. The crew watched as the cameras showed human cities with tall buildings, vehicles moving along paved roads, and thousands of humans walking around in apparent peace. "Look at them," said Zalrock with amusement. "They move so slowly. No urgency, no awareness of danger. They don't even seem to notice threats around them." The drones focused on different areas of human activity. They saw humans sitting at desks, inside buildings, staring at small screens. They saw humans standing in lines waiting patiently for various services. They saw humans in parks lying on grass or sitting on benches doing nothing productive. This will be easier than I thought, Vextar said. They appear to be completely passive. No warrior culture, no survival instincts. Our invasion force will overwhelm them before they can organize any resistance. Commander, Krelnox said, looking at new readings. I'm detecting some humans in more isolated areas. Perhaps we should observe their behavior in different environments. Good thinking, Vextar agreed. We need to understand how they behave when they're not in their protected settlements. Direct some drones to observe humans in more natural settings. Several drones changed course, heading toward forested areas and mountainous regions where fewer humans lived. The crew watched with interest as the cameras showed a very different landscape. Instead of concrete and metal, there were trees, rivers, and rocky terrain. This looks more like the environments we've seen on other planets, observed Quindal. I wonder how these soft city humans survive in such rough conditions. Probably very poorly, Zalrock laughed. They must avoid these areas entirely. But as the drones searched the wilderness areas, they began finding humans there too. These humans were dressed differently in rough clothing and heavy boots. They carried bags and equipment. Some were alone, others were in small groups. Interesting, said Krelnox. These humans appear to be attempting to survive in natural environments, though I'm sure they're struggling without their city comforts. One drone focused on a particularly isolated area in what the humans called the Pacific Northwest. Dense forests covered steep mountains and rivers ran through deep valleys. It was the kind of terrain that would challenge even experienced Zephyrian scouts. There, pointed Quindal. There's a human structure in that clearing. The camera showed a small wooden building surrounded by tall trees. Smoke rose from a chimney indicating someone was inside. The drone moved closer, its advanced sensors beginning detailed scans of the area. Just one human life sign, reported Krelnox. Male, approximately 34 years old according to our biological scanners. He appears to be living alone in this remote location. Perfect, Vextar said. An isolated human will give us excellent behavioral data without the complications of group dynamics. Begin detailed observation of this specimen. The drone settled into a hidden position among the trees and began recording. Within minutes, the human emerged from the building. He was tall by human standards, with brown hair and a strong build. He wore practical clothing and moved with purpose. He looks healthier than the city humans, observed Zalrock. More muscular development, probably from the physical labor required to survive in this environment, Krelnox explained. But still well within normal human parameters. Nothing that would concern our invasion planning. The human began performing various tasks around his dwelling. He split wood with a heavy axe, repaired equipment with basic tools, and checked various devices that appeared to be communication equipment. Document everything, Vextar ordered. This human's daily routine will help us understand their survival capabilities and threat level. The crew watched with growing confidence as the human went about his simple tasks. He appeared to be living a basic existence, dependent on primitive tools and manual labor. Exactly what they had expected from a species that had been classified as suitable for easy conquest. Sir, said Krelnox, I recommend we observe this subject for several days before proceeding. His isolated location makes him an ideal test case for understanding human behavior under stress. Agreed, Vextar replied. Begin continuous monitoring. Once we understand how this human responds to various situations, we'll have a complete picture of their species' capabilities. The Zephyrian fleet settled into orbit, confident that they were observing a peaceful, primitive species that would offer little resistance to their coming invasion. They had no idea that they had chosen to study a former soldier who had survived multiple combat deployments and now worked as a professional wilderness expert. The observation phase had begun, and both sides were about to learn things that would change everything. Jake Morrison stepped out of his cabin as the morning sun filtered through the tall pine trees. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of forest and mountain streams. He stretched his arms and took a deep breath, enjoying the peaceful quiet that city people never experienced. High above in their invisible ships, the Zephyrian observers focused their cameras on him. Commander Vextar leaned forward in his chair, studying the human they had selected as their primary research. Subject: Begin detailed recording, Vextar ordered. I want every action documented and analyzed. Jake walked to a small shed beside his cabin and pulled out his ranger equipment. He checked his radio, tested his emergency beacon, and loaded his backpack with supplies. The aliens watched with interest as he performed these routine tasks. Notice how methodical he is, said Science Officer Krell. Each action appears to follow a specific pattern. This suggests basic intelligence and planning ability. But very simple planning, added Navigator Quindell. Nothing that indicates advanced reasoning skills. Jake clipped a water bottle to his belt and shouldered his pack. The weight didn't seem to bother him at all. He had carried much heavier loads during his 8 years in the military, but the aliens didn't know about his background. To them, he appeared to be just another human living a simple life in the wilderness. His physical condition appears better than the city humans we observed, noted Krell as she watched Jake move easily despite the weight of his equipment. Probably from the manual labor required in this environment. Still well within normal, human parameters, Vextar said dismissively. Continue observation. Jake locked his cabin and began walking along a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The Zephyrian drone followed silently above the tree line, its advanced cameras tracking his every movement. The trail was rough and steep in many places, winding around large rocks and fallen trees. Jake navigated it with practiced ease, his boots finding solid footing on loose gravel and muddy sections. He moved at a steady pace that he could maintain for hours without rest. Interesting, said Communications Officer Zalrock. He seems to know this terrain very well. He doesn't hesitate or look for the best path. He just moves forward confidently. Probably because he uses this same route every day, Krell explained. Simple creatures often follow repetitive patterns, but Jake wasn't following a routine, patrol route. He was responding to a report from yesterday about possible bear activity near the popular camping area 3 miles from his station. As a park ranger, it was his job to check on any wildlife situations that might pose a danger to visitors. The aliens didn't understand his purpose. They saw only a human walking through difficult terrain for no apparent reason. This reinforced their belief that humans were simple creatures who did things without complex planning or logical goals. After an hour of hiking, Jake reached a small clearing where several camping spots had been set up for visitors. He stopped and examined the area carefully, looking for signs of animal activity. The Zephyrians watched as he knelt beside a large pine tree and studied something on the ground. "What is he doing now?" asked Quindell. Jake was examining bear tracks in the soft earth, but the aliens couldn't see the details clearly enough to understand. Their sensors detected that he was looking at markings in the dirt, but they interpreted this as simple curiosity about natural patterns. "Perhaps he's looking for food," suggested Zalrock. "These primitive humans might still gather nutrients from natural sources." Jake stood up and walked around the campsite, checking each area systematically. He found more tracks near a stream and some claw marks on a tree trunk. The evidence told him that a large male grizzly had been in the area recently, probably looking for food scraps left by campers. "His movements are very systematic," observed Krell. "He's examining each section of this clearing in an organized pattern. This shows some intelligence, though still basic level." "Probably instinctive behavior," Vextar said. "Many prey species develop territorial awareness to avoid predators." The irony was perfect. The aliens thought Jake was acting like prey when he was actually hunting for signs of one of Earth's most dangerous predators. His military training and ranger experience had taught him to read the wilderness like a book, but the Zephyrians saw only simple animal-like behavior. Jake pulled out a small device and made some notes. The alien sensors detected electromagnetic activity, but couldn't decode the human's simple text messages. He was recording his observations and sending a report to the main ranger station, but they thought he was just playing with a primitive tool. "Their technology is very basic," noted Zalrock. "That device appears to have limited functionality." After completing his survey of the campsite, Jake began the hike back to his cabin. But instead of taking the same trail, he chose a different route that would let him check other areas where bears might be active. This decision puzzled the watching aliens. "Why is he taking a different path?" asked Quindel. "If he knows the first route, why risk getting lost on an unfamiliar trail?" "Maybe he's confused," suggested Zalrock. "These primitive creatures probably have poor navigation skills." But Jake knew exactly where he was going. He had memorized every trail, stream, and landmark in his patrol area. The new route would take him past 2 more camping areas and a popular fishing spot where bears often looked for easy meals. As he walked, Jake moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. He automatically avoided loose rocks that might cause noise, stepped over fallen branches instead of breaking through them, and paused occasionally to listen for sounds that would tell him about animal activity in the area. The Zephyrians recorded all of this but misunderstood its significance. They saw careful movement and thought it showed fear. They saw pausing and listening and thought it showed confusion. They were watching a skilled professional at work, but interpreting it as the behavior of a lost amateur. "Notice how often he stops and looks around," said Krelnox. "This suggests high anxiety levels and poor confidence in his environment." "Typical prey behavior," Vextar agreed. "Constant vigilance against threats, but no real ability to deal with danger when it appears." Jake reached the second camping area and found it empty of bear sign. He checked the third location and found the same thing. This was good news. It meant the bear had probably moved on to a different part of the forest, but he would need to continue monitoring the situation over the next few days. As he headed back toward his cabin, Jake noticed something that made him pause. Fresh tracks in the mud beside a small stream, larger and deeper than the ones he had found earlier. These were very recent, probably from this morning. The bear was still in the area, and it was a big one. Jake knelt beside the tracks and studied them carefully. The size and depth told him this was a mature male, probably weighing over 400 pounds. The spacing between the tracks showed it was moving at a normal walking pace, not running or agitated. That was good. It meant the bear wasn't stressed or looking for trouble. But the direction of the tracks was concerning. The bear was heading toward the main camping area, the one most popular with families and inexperienced hikers. If it found food scraps or garbage there, it would keep coming back, and that could create a dangerous situation for visitors. "He's looking at more ground markings," observed Zalrock. "This behavior seems very important to him." "Probably some kind of primitive, religious or superstitious practice," suggested Krelnox. "Many simple cultures develop rituals around natural phenomena they don't understand." Jake stood up and checked his watch. It was still early morning, and the camping area wouldn't see visitors until afternoon at the earliest. That gave him time to investigate the situation properly and decide what action to take. He began following the bear tracks, moving carefully and quietly. This wasn't just curiosity, it was professional necessity. As a ranger, he needed to know where the bear was, what it was doing, and whether it posed a threat to park visitors. The Zephyrians watched with growing interest as Jake began what appeared to be a purposeful journey deeper into the wilderness. "Now he's following the ground markings," said Quindal. "This is definitely some kind of ritual behavior." "Or perhaps he's lost and trying to find his way back," suggested Zalrock. "Either way, this should provide excellent data about human behavior." "Under stress," said Vextar. "Continue recording everything." The aliens had no idea they were watching a trained professional tracker following the trail of a dangerous predator. To them, it looked like a confused human wandering aimlessly through the forest, possibly engaged in some primitive spiritual practice. Jake moved steadily along the bear's path, reading the signs like words on a page. The animal was definitely heading toward the main camping area, and it seemed to be in no hurry. This was both good and bad news. Good because a calm bear was less likely to be aggressive, bad because it suggested the bear was comfortable in the area and might be planning to stay. As he followed the tracks, Jake began forming a plan. If the bear had settled near the camping area, he would need to safely relocate it before visitors arrived. This was exactly the kind of situation his training had prepared him for, but it would require careful planning and flawless execution. Jake followed the bear tracks for 20 minutes through dense forest until he reached the edge of the main camping area. He crouched behind a large fallen log and carefully looked through the trees. What he saw made his stomach tighten with concern. A massive grizzly bear stood in the center of the campsite, easily 400 pounds of muscle and fur. The animal was rummaging through a trash container that some careless camper had left unsecured. Food wrappers and garbage were scattered around the bear's feet as it searched for anything edible. High above, the Zephyrian observers suddenly became very alert as their cameras focused on the scene unfolding below. "Commander, we have a significant development," said Science Officer Krelnox, her voice tight with excitement. "The human has encountered a large predator." Commander Vextar leaned forward in his chair. "Excellent. This will give us perfect data on human response to mortal danger. Begin detailed recording of all physiological responses. The predator appears to be approximately 6 times the human's body weight," reported Navigator Quindal as he ran quick calculations. "Equipped with natural weapons, including claws and teeth, the human has no chance of survival in direct combat." "This should be over quickly," agreed Communications Officer Zalrock. "We'll finally see how these humans behave when faced with their natural predators." The aliens expected to witness typical prey behavior. They anticipated that Jake would either run away in panic or freeze in terror until the bear killed him. Either response would confirm their analysis that humans were weak, frightened creatures suitable for easy conquest. But Jake didn't run. He didn't freeze. Instead, he remained perfectly still behind the log and began analyzing the situation with the calm focus of a trained professional. The bear was clearly habituated to human food sources, which made it dangerous. It showed no fear of the human scent in the campsite and seemed comfortable in the area. This meant it would likely return, creating an ongoing threat to park visitors. The situation required immediate action. Jake quietly reached into his pack and pulled out several items: a loud whistle, a small air horn, and a canister of bear spray. He also had his emergency radio and a flare gun for signaling. These were standard ranger equipment for dealing with wildlife encounters. "What is the human doing?" asked Krelnox, watching Jake's careful preparations. "Why isn't he running away?" "Maybe he's paralyzed with fear," suggested Quindal. "Some prey species freeze when confronted by predators. But his vital signs don't show panic," Krelnox said, checking her readings. "His heart rate is elevated but controlled. His breathing is steady. This doesn't match expected fear responses." Jake finished his preparations and took a deep breath. He had dealt with bears before during his time as a ranger, though never one quite this large. The key was to appear confident and in control while giving the animal a clear escape route. Bears usually wanted to avoid conflict as much as humans did. He stood up slowly, making himself visible to the bear but not making any sudden movements. The massive animal looked up from the garbage and stared directly at him. "The human is revealing himself to the predator," Zalrock said in disbelief. "This makes no tactical sense. He's eliminating his only advantage." "Perhaps human intelligence is even lower than we estimated," Vextar said. "This appears to be suicidal behavior." But Jake knew exactly what he was doing. He needed to establish dominance without triggering an aggressive response. He stood tall, made himself look as large as possible, and spoke to the bear in a firm, calm voice. "Hey there, big guy," Jake said loudly but without shouting. "You need to move along now. This isn't your place." The bear stopped eating and focused, completely on Jake. It rose up on its hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall, and sniffed the air. Jake could see the intelligence in its dark eyes as it evaluated this new situation. "The predator is displaying threat behavior," Krelnox reported, her voice filled with tension. "It has assumed an aggressive posture. The human should be running now." "Any second now, we'll see typical prey response," Vextar said confidently. Instead, Jake began walking slowly sideways, keeping his eyes on the bear while moving toward a better position. He needed to get closer to the trail that led away from the campsite, giving the bear a clear path to leave the area. "He's moving toward the predator," Quindal said in shock. "This is completely irrational behavior." Jake raised the air horn and gave it a short blast. The loud noise echoed through the forest, causing birds to fly away and small animals to scatter. The bear dropped back to all four legs and took a step backward, clearly startled by the sudden sound. "Good," Jake said, still speaking in a firm voice. "That's right. Time to go." He took another step sideways, angling toward the trail while keeping his body facing the bear. The animal watched him carefully, trying to decide whether this human represented a threat or just an annoyance. "The human is using artificial sound generation," Krell Knox observed. "But why? What tactical advantage could noise provide?" "Maybe it's some kind of primitive magic ritual," suggested Zalrock. "These simple creatures might believe sounds can protect them." Jake triggered the air horn again, this time giving it a longer blast. The bear shook its massive head and took several steps away from the garbage. It was clearly uncomfortable with the noise, but not yet ready to leave completely. "Come on, buddy," Jake said, continuing his careful movement. "You know you don't belong here. Let's make this easy for both of us." The bear watched Jake with growing irritation. It had been enjoying its feast of human food and didn't appreciate the interruption. It made a low growling sound and took a step forward, testing Jake's resolve. "Now the predator is advancing," Vexitar said. "The human's strange behavior has only delayed the inevitable." But Jake was ready for this response. He pulled out the whistle and blew 3 sharp, piercing blasts while simultaneously raising his arms above his head to make himself appear larger. The combination of loud noise and aggressive body language sent a clear message to the bear. The effect was immediate. The bear stopped its advance and actually took 2 steps backward. It was beginning to understand that this human was not behaving like normal prey. Instead of running away or cowering in fear, Jake was standing his ground and actively challenging the bear's presence. "This is unprecedented," Krell said, her voice filled with confusion. "The predator is retreating from the human. Our behavioral models don't account for this possibility. There must be some factor we're not detecting," Vexitar said, though his confidence was beginning to waver. "Continue observation." Jake saw the bear's hesitation and pressed his advantage. He took several deliberate steps forward, maintaining eye contact and speaking in the same firm, commanding voice. "That's right, big guy. This is my territory, not yours. Time to find somewhere else to look for food." The bear was now clearly conflicted. Its natural instincts told it that as the larger, stronger animal, it should dominate this encounter. But Jake's confident behavior and the strange noises he was making suggested that this human might be more dangerous than he appeared. Jake reached into his pack and pulled out a small rock. With practiced accuracy, he threw it so that it landed just a few feet in front of the bear, close enough to get attention but not close enough to be seen as a direct attack. "Move along," Jake said firmly. "I'm not asking again." The bear looked at the rock, then back at Jake. It was beginning to understand that this human was not going to back down or run away. For the first time in the encounter, the massive predator seemed uncertain about its next move. The human threw a projectile at the predator, Quindal reported in amazement. A small, harmless projectile, but the predator appears to be intimidated by the action. "This makes no sense," Zalrock said. "The projectile couldn't possibly harm a creature of that size. Why would the predator be concerned?" Jake could see the doubt in the bear's eyes. He had successfully established himself as the dominant presence in this encounter. But the situation was still dangerous. Bears were unpredictable, and this one was large enough to kill him easily if it decided to attack. He needed to give the bear a face-saving way to leave the area. Maintaining his confident posture, Jake began moving slowly toward the side of the clearing, opening up the main trail for the bear to use as an escape route. "You can go that way," Jake said, gesturing toward the trail with his free hand while keeping the air horn ready in the other. "Nice and easy, no need for trouble." The bear watched Jake's movement and seemed to understand the offer. It looked toward the trail, then back at Jake, then toward the trail again. The path was clear, and this strange human was giving it an opportunity to leave without losing face. "The human is providing an escape route for the predator," Krell observed with growing astonishment. "This suggests advanced tactical thinking and understanding of predator psychology." "Impossible," Vexitar said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "These readings must be incorrect." The bear made its decision. With one last look at Jake, it turned and began walking slowly toward the trail. It moved with dignity, not like a defeated animal fleeing in panic, but like a creature choosing to go somewhere else because it had better things to do. Jake maintained his position and his alert posture until the bear disappeared into the forest. Commander Vextar stared at the main screen in complete silence. His bridge crew exchanged worried glances as they watched the human calmly collect the scattered garbage that the bear had left behind. The creature they had assumed would be dead by now was instead cleaning up the campsite as if nothing unusual had happened. "Run the encounter again," Vextar ordered quietly. "I want to see every detail." Science Officer Krell Knox activated the replay system. The entire bridge crew watched in stunned silence as Jake's 20-minute confrontation with the massive predator played out again on their screens. "Stop there," Vextar said when the recording reached the moment Jake first stood up from behind the log. "Analyze the human's physiological readings at this point." Krell Knox pulled up the detailed sensor data. Heart rate is elevated to 95 beats per minute but steady. Breathing is controlled and regular. Stress hormones are present but not at panic levels. Commander, these readings suggest the human was alert but not afraid. "That's impossible," said Navigator Quindal. "Any rational creature should be terrified when facing a predator 6 times its size." "Continue the analysis," Vextar ordered. They watched as Jake prepared his equipment and began his systematic approach to the bear. Krell Knox provided commentary as the scene unfolded. "Notice how he selects specific tools for specific purposes," she said. "The noise-making devices, the chemical spray, the projectile weapons. This isn't random panic behavior. This is organized tactical planning." "But the tools are so primitive," protested Communications Officer Zalrock. "How could such simple devices be effective against a large predator?" "That's what I'm trying to understand," Krell Knox replied, her voice filled with confusion. "According to our models, those tools should be useless, yet the predator clearly responded to them." The replay continued, showing Jake's confident approach and his use of sound-based deterrence. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the massive bear actually retreated from the much smaller human. "Pause there," Vextar said, as Jake threw the small rock near the bear's feet. "What was the purpose of that action?" Krell Knox studied the readings carefully. The projectile was too small to cause physical damage, but watch the predator's reaction. It steps backward and shows signs of uncertainty. Somehow, the human knew this would happen. "How could he know?" asked Quindal. "Does this suggest the human has encountered this specific predator before?" "Negative," Krell Knox answered. "Our long-range scans show this was their first meeting, yet the human responded, as if he understood exactly how the predator would behave." Vextar felt a cold chill run through his body. "Are you suggesting the human has some kind of predictive ability?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting," Krell Knox admitted. "Nothing in our database explains this behavior." They continued watching, as Jake provided the bear with an escape route, and the massive predator chose to leave rather than fight. When the recording ended, the bridge fell silent again. "Run a complete analysis of the human's physical capabilities during the encounter," Vextar ordered. "I want exact measurements." Krell Knox worked at her station for several minutes processing the detailed sensor data. When she looked up, her expression was deeply troubled. "Commander, the human's performance exceeded our baseline estimates in every category. Physical strength, endurance, reaction time, cognitive processing speed, and tactical awareness all measured significantly higher than our previous calculations." "How much higher?" Vextar asked. "Strength output was 40% above estimated. Human maximum. Endurance indicators suggest he could maintain physical activity for hours without significant degradation. Reaction times were faster than our own junior officers." The bridge crew exchanged alarmed looks. Their own junior officers were trained warriors from a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. "There must be an error in the readings," Zalrock said desperately. "These numbers would make this human superior to trained Zephyrian soldiers." "I've checked the calibrations 3 times, Krell Knox replied. "The readings are accurate." Vextar stood up and began pacing behind his command chair. "What about his tactical performance?" How do we explain his ability to predict and control the predator's behavior? That's the most disturbing part, Krelnox said. His tactical decisions were flawless. He identified the optimal position, selected appropriate tools, managed the engagement tempo, and provided the predator with a face-saving withdrawal option. This level of tactical sophistication rivals our own military doctrine. But he's just one human living alone in the wilderness, Quindal protested. How could a primitive creature develop such advanced combat skills? Maybe he's not as primitive as we thought, Vextar said slowly. The implications were starting to sink in. What if we've completely misunderstood this species? Krelnox pulled up the broader sensor data from their Earth observations. Commander, I've been reviewing our scans of human settlements. If we adjust our analysis based on what we observed today, some very disturbing patterns emerge. Show me, Vextar ordered. The main screen displayed images of human cities, but now the data was interpreted differently. Instead of seeing passive, weak creatures living in protective shelters, the crew began to recognize organized military installations, transportation networks, and industrial facilities. Those large structures we thought were simple dwellings, Krelnox explained. They're actually sophisticated defensive positions. Multi-level construction, reinforced materials, strategic positioning for mutual support. And those vehicles moving along the roadways, added Quindal. They're not just transportation, they're logistics networks, supply lines connecting defensive positions across vast distances. Zalrock was studying communication intercepts. Commander, I'm detecting massive amounts of coordinated data transmission between human settlements. This isn't primitive communication. This is a sophisticated command and control network. Vextar felt his confidence crumbling as the true picture began to emerge. How many humans did we count on this planet? 8 billion. Krelnox answered quietly. 8 billion. Vextar repeated slowly. If each one has the capabilities we just observed, then we're not looking at a planet of prey animals. We're looking at a planet of 8 billion trained warriors. The silence on the bridge was deafening as everyone processed this revelation. Their invasion force consisted of 50,000 Zephyrian soldiers. Even with superior technology, those odds were terrifying. Sir, Krelnox said hesitantly, there's something else. I've been analyzing the environment where we observed the human. What about it? The gravity is higher than we initially calculated. The atmospheric pressure is thicker. The temperature variations are more extreme. And the biological diversity indicates a much more dangerous ecosystem than we realized. Meaning, this planet isn't just inhabited by dangerous creatures, Krelnox explained. This entire world is what we would classify as a death world. The environment itself is constantly trying to kill everything that lives here. Vextar sank back into his command chair as the full implications hit him. You're saying these humans evolved on a death world? They've been fighting for survival every day of their existence. Exactly. And not just fighting individual predators like we observe today. They've been fighting the planet itself. Extreme weather, dangerous terrain, hostile wildlife, resource scarcity. Everything about their world has been trying to eliminate them for millions of years. And instead of being eliminated, Quindal said with growing horror, they thrived. They not only survived but became the dominant species on a death world. Zalrock was reviewing more communication intercepts. Commander, I'm detecting references to something humans call extreme sports. They appear to deliberately seek out dangerous activities for entertainment. Entertainment? Vextar asked weakly. They intentionally jump from high places with only fabric to slow their fall. They climb vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet. They deliberately expose themselves to harsh environments for fun. That's impossible, Quindal said. No sane species would risk death for entertainment. Unless, Krelnox said slowly, they're so adapted to constant danger that what we consider life-threatening they consider recreational. Vexitar stood up again and walked to the main viewing screen. Earth hung in space before them, looking deceptively peaceful with its blue oceans and white clouds. But now he understood the truth. This wasn't a peaceful world inhabited by gentle creatures. This was a forge that had spent millions of years creating the most dangerous species in the galaxy. "Sir," Zalrock said quietly, "what are your orders?" Vextar continued staring at Earth for a long moment. 8 billion humans. 8 billion creatures that had been forged by millions of years of constant warfare against a death world. 8 billion warriors who considered facing massive predators to be a normal part of their daily routine. "Recall all observation drones," he said finally. "Begin preparations for immediate departure." "Sir?" Quindal asked in confusion. "What about the invasion?" Vextar turned to face his crew. "There will be no invasion. Signal the fleet. We're leaving this system immediately." "But Commander," Krell Nox protested, "our orders were to assess and conquer this planet." "I have assessed it," Vextar replied firmly. "And I'm reporting that this world is defended by the most dangerous species we've ever encountered." Jake finished cleaning up the scattered garbage and loaded it into a large bag he carried in his pack. He made sure every piece of trash was collected, knowing that leaving any food smell behind would only encourage the bear to return. The campsite looked pristine again, ready for the next group of visitors who would never know how close they had come to danger. He pulled out his radio and contacted the main ranger station. "Base, this is Jake. Bear situation at Site 7 has been resolved. Large male grizzly successfully relocated without incident. Recommend posting warning signs and extra garbage patrol for the next week." "Copy that, Jake," came the reply from his supervisor. "Good work. Any problems during the encounter?" "Negative. Standard procedure worked perfectly. The bear was cooperative. Once he understood the situation, Jake clipped the radio back to his belt and shouldered his pack. To him, the entire encounter had been routine professional work. Nothing more exciting than fixing a broken trail sign or clearing fallen trees from a hiking path. He had no idea that his morning's work had just saved his entire planet from invasion. High above in their ships, the Zephyrian fleet was in chaos. Commander Vextar had called an emergency meeting of all ship captains, and the conference room buzzed with nervous conversation as 12 commanders tried to understand what they had witnessed. "The reconnaissance data is clear," Vextar announced to the assembled group. "Our target assessment was completely wrong. This planet is not suitable for standard conquest procedures." Captain Mordak of the assault ship leaned forward. "Commander, are you saying we should abort the mission based on observing one human interact with local wildlife?" "I'm saying we should abort because that one human demonstrated capabilities that exceed our trained soldiers," Vextar replied, firmly. "And there are 8 billion more just like him." The room erupted in protests and questions. Captain Zelnara of the troop transport spoke up. "Surely you're exaggerating. One unusual encounter doesn't represent an entire species." "Science." Officer Krell Nox activated the main display and showed the recorded encounter. "Watch for yourselves. Pay attention to the human's tactical decisions, physical performance, and psychological dominance over a predator that outweighs him by several hundred pounds." The assembled captains watched in growing silence as Jake's confrontation with the grizzly bear played out on the screen. When the recording ended, the room was completely quiet. "This changes everything," Captain Mordak said slowly. "If this represents normal human capability, our invasion force is inadequate." "It's worse than inadequate," Krell Nox interjected. "I've run projections based on what we observed. If we attempted a standard planetary assault, our casualties would be catastrophic." "Show them the environmental analysis," Vextar ordered. Krell Nox switched to a different display showing Earth's atmospheric composition, gravity measurements, and biological diversity readings. "This planet registers as a Class 9 death world on our habitability scale. The humans haven't just survived here, they've thrived and become the dominant species." Captain Zelnara studied the data with growing alarm. "A Class 9 world? Our troops require environmental suits just to operate safely on Class 7 planets." "Exactly," Vextar said. "These humans live unprotected on a world that would kill most of our soldiers within hours. They've been shaped by millions of years of constant environmental warfare." Captain Hixron of the science vessel had been quiet throughout the meeting. Now he spoke up with a question that chilled everyone in the room. "Commander, What was the human doing in that remote location? Why was he alone in such dangerous territory? Krell checked her files. According to our observations, he appears to be some kind of territorial guardian. He patrols vast areas of wilderness, monitoring for threats and maintaining safety for other humans who visit the region. He does this alone? Captain Hicksron asked. Completely alone. He lives by himself, operates without backup, and handles dangerous situations as routine daily work. The implications sank in around the room. This wasn't a specially trained warrior or an elite soldier. This was apparently just a normal human doing a normal job on their Deathworld home. What about their military forces? Asked Captain Mordak. If this represents civilian capability, what are their actual warriors like? Krell pulled up intercepts from human communication networks. Based on our analysis of their data transmissions, they maintain organized military forces, numbering in the millions. Professional soldiers with advanced training, sophisticated equipment, and combat experience. Combat experience against what? Captain Zelnara asked, though she seemed afraid of the answer. Against each other, Krell replied. Human historical records show they've been fighting constant wars among themselves for thousands of years. They've turned warfare into a science. They study it, practice it, and continuously improve their methods. Commander Vextar stood up and walked to the main viewing screen, where Earth hung in space like a blue and white jewel. Gentlemen, we came here expecting to conquer a primitive world inhabited by peaceful creatures. Instead, we've discovered a death world populated by 8 billion apex predators who have spent their entire evolutionary history learning to kill anything that threatens them. He turned back to face the assembled captains. They don't just fight to survive. They fight for entertainment. They fight for resources. They fight for ideas. They fight for territory. Fighting is so fundamental to their nature that they've made it into art forms, competitive sports, and cultural traditions. Captain Mordak was studying tactical displays on his personal tablet. Sir, even if we could match them individually, the numbers are impossible. Our entire invasion fleet carries 50,000 troops. They have billions of combat-capable individuals. And that's assuming we could match them individually, Vextar added grimly, which our observations suggest we cannot. The meeting continued for another hour as the captains reviewed data, ran scenarios, and tried to find any possible way to salvage their mission. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. Earth was not a target for conquest. It was a fortress world defended by the most dangerous species any of them had ever encountered. Meanwhile, Jake had reached his cabin and was preparing his daily report. He sat at his small desk and typed up the bear encounter on his laptop, following standard Park Service protocols for wildlife management incidents. Incident Report 2025-156, he typed. Large male grizzly bear observed at Camping Area 7. Estimated weight 400 pounds. Animal showed food habituation behavior and was successfully relocated using standard deterrent procedures. No injuries to personnel or wildlife. Recommend increased garbage monitoring and visitor education in affected area. He saved the file and sent it electronically to the park headquarters, where it would be filed along with hundreds of similar reports from rangers across the country. Just another day's work protecting tourists from the natural dangers of the wilderness. Back in the Zephyrian fleet, the final decision was being made. Commander Vextar stood before his senior staff and issued orders that would save both civilizations from a devastating war. All ships will begin immediate departure from this system, he announced. Set course for the Kepler station. I'll be filing a complete report with High Command recommending that this planet be classified as off-limits to all Zephyrian operations. What classification should we assign? Asked Krell. Vextar thought for a moment about Jake Morrison, calmly facing down a massive predator as if it were just another day at the office. Deathworld, inhabited by apex predators. Avoid at all costs. As the 12 ships of the Zephyrian fleet slowly moved away from Earth, Vextar composed his official report. He described a world where the inhabitants routinely faced mortal combat as part of their daily lives, where environmental conditions so harsh that they would kill most galactic species were considered normal, where 8 billion warriors had been forged by millions of years of constant warfare against their own planet, He recommended that Earth be added to the Galactic Registry as a protected zone, not for the planet's benefit, but for the safety of any species foolish enough to consider invasion. Within days, word spread through the Zephyrian communication networks and beyond. Earth, the small blue planet in the outer spiral arm, was home to a species so dangerous that even the mighty Zephyrian Empire had turned away, rather than face them in battle. Other alien civilizations received the warning and passed it along. The Deathworlders of Earth were to be avoided at all costs. Their planet was marked on star charts with symbols indicating extreme danger to any who approached with hostile intent. Jake Morrison continued his work as a park ranger, completely unaware that his routine Tuesday morning bear encounter had become a legend told throughout the galaxy. Stories spread of the terrifying humans who wrestled apex predators as part of their regular employment, who lived unprotected on a world that would kill any other known species, and who had turned survival into an art form. Years later, when humanity finally developed faster-than-light travel and made contact with galactic civilization, they were amazed to discover that Earth was already famous throughout the galaxy as the home of the most feared warriors in known space.